The only sane vote we as Kenyans cast on the ballot was in 2010 when we voted for the new constitution. And this constitution defends us as Kenyans in so many ways that we may never fully know. When you look at Article 46 on consumer protection and advertisement, Clause 2 of Article 46 provides that Parliament shall enact legislation to ensure that all advertisements are fair, honest, and decent. When the Constitution uses ethical words like honest, it ceases from just being a wish and a cosmetic. It turns to being an imperative. The Constitution is not asking you to be honest. The Constitution is demanding that you are honest in your advertisement. And it's not just speaking to us, it's speaking even to these multinational companies operating within Kenya, that you must be honest in your advertisement. So that means if you, as Syngenta, want to sell Glamaxon, which contains paraquat to the Kenyans, let them know that one, paraquat is a possible carcinogenic classified as class 2 under the WHO calendar, and that it has the potential of bringing Parkinsonism. I've been to these fields, and sometimes I even wished I was wrong, because I've gone to see farmers who, in the morning, they just took milk to the dairy. Then, with a team of forensic experts and scientists, we test them and subject them to this test. And when we go, we meet very high levels of paraquat within their blood. I've seen farmers with more than 2 units of paraquat in their blood. Essentially, the human body is supposed to have 0 unit of paraquat. So you have a farmer here with 2 or more units of paraquat. What that means is, in the next 5 years, this farmer will have hated Parkinsonism. Even 0.1 unit of paraquat in your blood is way too much, because the human body breaks down paraquat to monoquat, and in the process, it makes the human body vulnerable to other secondary infections. Their bodies, in other words, lose immunity. It's just like what HIV does to the human body. Even though we build a 20,000 bed capacity for cancer patients, every year we have 40,000 new cancer cases. So how many beds do we need to build? It's not sustainable. We will never build enough. We can never cure enough. Every time we'll come with new health systems, we may brand them and bring new ones. Every time we will enforce and ensure Kenyans are contributing, but we will never contribute enough. Go to the cancer center at KNH. Just do a random data of what is the background of most of these patients. You'll find most of them are former farm workers. Most have actively interacted with the use of these pesticides that we're bringing to court. These are the people who are feeding you 5 years ago, and now they're on their deathbed.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Organic Podcast. This is your home of organic conversations. I'm your host, the Organic Guy. And right around here, we have conversation around how we can make our food systems really get to work for us rather than against us. And today, I want us to have a very interesting conversation. And it's a conversation around what we eat. If you've been paying close attention into the media, there's been a lot of reports on poisons in our food, and for like a normal guy, there's so many ways that you can go around that. And one of the ways, of course, look for food without poison, buying organic, or like knowing your farmer, or like petitioning the government to do something about it. The other route is actually to hold the pesticide producers accountable for the product that they're putting into the market. So today I'm super pleased to have someone who has actually gone to court and is trying to hold these pesticide manufacturers accountable to their product. So I'm super excited for this conversation. He goes by the name of Advocate Kelvin. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. And the name of the podcast is actually in sync with what you're doing. I really like the name, Organic Guy. And, people assume as if we started farming the other day with the coming of, post-colonial and colonialism. Farming did not come with civilization. Farming has been here with us for thousands and thousands of years. Even those who really love the Bible and the Quran will know that when there was always famine in the Western and Asian world, they always came for food in Africa. So we can go back to our root, to the very ways that generations before us farmed. And they farmed in organic ways, they farmed in very safe ways. And this is the entire conversation about today. I'm really, really happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for making the time for the podcast. And I think it's a conversation that we need to have around this space. I have a lot of questions about the amazing work you're doing, and such a really bold decision to sort of go against the giants of the guys who are involved in the agricultural sector. But before we get into conversation, just give guys a little bit of context about yourself. So who is Kelvin? Like, where did you grow up? What were your aspirations, growing up? Did you always want to be a lawyer when you were a kid? So give us a little bit of that context.
Thank you so much. My name is Kelvin Kubai. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I primarily focus on litigation, especially in the areas of environmental law and human rights litigations. I've led a number of successful class actions in the areas of environmental law. I was able to push the British Army in Laikipia to compensate for the damages caused to the environment, and we had a settlement of nearly 530 million shillings for about 7,000 peoples of Laikipia. I've also been focused in human rights litigations like the present case of Agnes Wanjiru. And today, I'm happy now to be speaking about this present case against agrochemical giant. Funny, when I look back, I really never wanted to be a lawyer. I actually wanted to be a dentist. And I was an ELP scholar, something that I really, really pretty much appreciate. ELP, there is a program within Equity Bank known as Equity Leaders Program. And they always have, after every cohort, and they take some people for internship, especially when you've done well in your KCSE exams. And through that process is when I first came into Inception with a number of things that I do, and I was able to learn a lot, get to meet people and understand them even in a corporate society. And while at Equity, I was primarily focused. They had a program of flying out, and we would apply to global universities out there. So I grew up looking for this American dream. I really wanted to go out there in Stanford, at Johns Hopkins, study medicine, do dentistry, and run away and focus on the American dream. But today I'm happy being a lawyer, and I think the Kenyan dream is much sweeter and much bigger, helping my people, my communities, and it's much more fulfilling. And given a chance or a choice today, I'll choose law 100 times over.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, and it's one of those things you get to realize later in life in terms of like the American dream, or like some of the things we were fed when growing up, like grass is greener on the other side. Yeah, but apparently it's where you water it, so it's important, and then it gives you a lot of like purpose. So you say like your dream now is like to sort of help your people. So that's a more, I think, meaningful purpose for you to pursue. And then I just learned like there's a difference between being a lawyer and an advocate.
To put it simply is to say that every advocate is a lawyer, but not every lawyer is an advocate. To become an advocate, you have to take another 2-year program at the Kenya School of Law, where you go through the advocacy training and you sit for your bar exams, and then you are sworn into the bar. Like recently we had a cohort of 960 new learned friends, and we welcome them to the bar. We really need fresh minds.
It's quite interesting because I saw this conversation on the internet that some universities should not offer low degrees. Like, for a long time we've known Nairobi University is like the epicenter of producing lawyers. Yeah, what do you think? Like, is it like a big deal?
Well, from where I sit, I really don't think it's much of a big deal, especially for law. You may argue that some of these upcoming universities have no libraries or even supporting staff to help them through the learning. But actually, law is, to a bigger extent, much more of experience. You actually learn more outside law school than in law school. So for the new learned friends we are welcoming on board, learning has just started. If you really want to excel in this field, you really have to now even learn more than you actually learned while at law school. I think that's where we get our name, Learned Friends. It's not because of what we learned in school. It's actually because of what we have to learn every day. Every day we've got dispensing judgment, and you have to read those judgments and know what is the new law, how have judges interpreted the law, because law develops every day. So today there is what we knew the law was. But in the course of today, a judge somewhere will interpret it differently. And what the judge interprets the law to be, that's to a lawyer is precedence. And so you have to keep on updating yourself with new precedents, And we have new interesting judgments coming from our High Court, and you've also to check from judgments from the Commonwealth. So check what a judge in Kenya said. You'll go to the Australian law report and check what the judges in Australia said. You'll look at what the judges in India said. And you have to track that judgment if it is overturned at the Court of Appeal, because if the Court of Appeal, interpret it otherwise, differently from what the High Court interpreted it, then you have to stick with the Court of Appeal interpretation. And that the Supreme Court may come and interpret it differently from what the Court of Appeal interpreted it. And so if you are stuck with your High Court judgment, then you'll be outdated, So regardless of whether you land at University of Nairobi, the University of Nairobi, where I'm proud to be an alma mater, it's my alma mater, someone from Kabianga will beat you. And this is the interesting thing about our profession. In the course of my litigation, I've been pitted against my professors. In the present case that we are speaking about, the agrochemical, one of the respondents, Syngenta, was represented by my former professor at law school and the Attorney General Emeritus, Professor Githum Wigai. Yeah, I've given him a run for his money, and he's my former professor. So the basic point is, it really matters not. It matters more on what you do outside law school than what you did in law school. And it matters not whether someone was your professor. You could actually beat them up. If the law is on your side, you do your research and you sway the judges to see things from your side of view. That's the beauty of law.
Yeah, I think that's the best mindset to have, to always have that continuous learning process. Otherwise, you'll always get left behind. I think it's one of the things graduates always don't put in mind. So they are like, I've gotten my degree, so I'm just done for that.
Absolutely. You're very right. When we had all these, one of the propagators of this conversation, my very good senior, Nelson Harvey, when he was getting admitted, there were no practice areas like we have today. There was no AI, So there's a new practice law that he himself, even though he was at the University of Nairobi, someone at Tom Mboya University might have come across this new practice area of AI, which he never learned even while at the University of Nairobi. So it's not a matter of competition and thinking that our practice areas are getting cut by, so many proliferation of new advocates in town. But to understand that new practice areas keep on emerging every day. Like what primarily I focus on, my case has been the first class action suit in this country. And it has been quoted even by the Supreme Court in subsequent cases. And this was not something that I've seen, advocate before me having done. So there are new practice areas coming up every day, and we as learned friends, we have to keep on learning and unlearning as well, and for the betterment of our society and our client.
So let's dive deep into this litigation you're having. So for a layman, who has no clue about what goes into law, just help break it down for us. First of all, what is it? And then even before we get into what is it, take us behind the scenes. What processes do you have to go through for you to get into court and say, hey, I have this case, I want to present it, and for them to actually, say, you have something, we need to hear you?
There are primarily three main ways of instituting a suit. So you will begin ordinarily by way of a plaint. Plaints are in ordinary cases where we have parties, especially in civil suits. One party suing the other party. It could be an individual against a company suing another company. So it begins with a plaint. And a plaint is where you have a plaintiff and you have a defendant. So a plaintiff is the one who institutes the plaint. Perhaps maybe you had a car accident and so unfortunate, so you sue the insurance company. And you have to begin by way of a plaint. Well, before a plaint, you'll do a demand letter. There are these love letters lawyers exchange, and you kind of send some threats, well packaged in nice sounding English, trying to get a quick settlement. And if they do not hit to the threat, then you proceed to a plaint. So you've instituting suit by way of a plaint. Then you have another way of instituting a suit, and that is through a petition. and petitions is what most Kenyans are conversant with. Petitions are ordinarily filed before a constitutional court, and also at the Environment and Land Court, you can institute a matter also by way of plaint, as well as by way of a petition. In a petition now, instead of having a plaintiff and a defendant, you have now a petitioner who's now the one instituting, or who would ordinarily be called a plaintiff in a normal civil suit, and the other party is known as a respondent. So you have a petitioner and you have the respondent. That is now in areas of petitions, and most of them are guided by the Mutunga rules. We have practice rules known as Mutunga rules. Mutunga rules is after our constitution. Mutunga developed these practice rules to help litigants institute suit by way of petitions. And you have other now instances where you are doing judicial review. Judicial review are more of administrative issues, where a certain decision maker, for instance, you're in the university and you're dismissed, or your learning is cut short, and a decision has been made by the board which you are not happy with. So you have to institute now a judicial review proceedings, which are now instituted differently from how we institute a plate or a petition. So that is the basics of how you begin a case in court. So for the case now we are handling against these agrochemicals, we instituted it by way of a petition to the Environment and Land Court. And our choice of jurisdiction at the Environment and Land Court was premised on our articles on environment, specifically articles 42, 69, and 70. So the basics of it is, and I always say this, that the only sane vote we as Kenyans cast on the ballot was in 2010 when we voted for the new constitution. That was the best vote we ever cast as a country. And this constitution defends us as Kenyans in so many ways that we may never fully know. I mean, our constitution is that guardian angel that stands behind us as Kenyans and protects us, sometimes even without us knowing. When the constitution was being promulgated, I was a very young boy. I was in class 5. And I remember watching this rare spectacle of, in that particular day, I remember our military did parade all our military gears. We could see this rare spectacle of tanks, and they were marching at Uhuru Gardens as this was being promulgated, and we could see. And we are, as young people, as young boys, you are really mesmerized to this rare sight. And little did I know that more than these tanks and more than our military, what defends us as Kenyans is our constitution. And it defends us because when you look at the provisions of Articles 42, 69, and 70, it says that every Kenyan has a right to a clean and healthy environment. When we look at Articles 43, which is another anchor article through which we anchored our petition, Article 43, on Clause 1 of Article 43, that every Kenyan has a right to the highest attainable standards of health. Every Kenyan has a right to highest attainable standards of health. When you go to Clause C of Article 43, again it says that every Kenyan has a right to be free from hunger, to have adequate food, and it doesn't stop there. It goes ahead to say of acceptable quality. So the Constitution is not just looking at the quantity of food on your table. The Constitution is looking at the quality of food in your plate. It says it's not just enough for the organic guy to have a plate of ugali and spinach. It is equally important for the organic guy to have a plate of ugali that is of acceptable quality, because it's a bit logic for you to have a 2 kg of ugali that is, milled from flour of so much in aflatoxins. Someone harvested some rotten maize and they, went to the posho mill and it's been grounded to some flour that you use to make your ugali. So the Constitution is not looking at the quantity. It further goes to look at the quality. And now when we as Kenyans know that our Constitution is guarding us, that we have the right to food of acceptable quality, then what do we do as Kenyans? Do we just sit there? The Constitution speaks, but the Constitution can only come into effect when we enforce it. when we go to court and have it interpreted and tell judges, when a constitution gives a right, it actually gives a responsibility to someone else. To understand it basically is, if your child has a right to education, it gives you as the parent a responsibility to pay the school fees. So it doesn't say that we are actually telling you to pay school fees. It just says that we've given this child right to education. So when the Constitution gives Kenyans right to food of not just being enough, not just of the right of quantity, but of acceptable quality. So who's given this responsibility? The people who's given these responsibilities of ensuring that we have food of acceptable quality are, number one, our Ministry of Agriculture, and number two, our Ministry of Health, number three, our farmers, and number four, every stakeholder in the agricultural sector, which includes the manufacturers of these pesticides that are used in our agriculture. So that now explains who our respondents are, based on Article 43, that Kenyans, you have a right to food of acceptable quality, and if we do not have food of acceptable quality, then who do we ask the question? And it's basically the people involved in the agricultural supply chain. So you've to go right at the root. Growing up as kids in the villages, there used to be what we used to call agricultural extension officers. And actually there were three main people that we saw in the villages. I forgot to say this. I grew up in a very beautiful village at somewhere known as Timau. And Timau is on the beautiful shoulders of Mount Kenya, and you can always wake up in the morning and see the snow-capped mountains. So, to say the least, I was not spared from offering labor in my parents will always, make me pay for this responsibility that the Constitution gives them of paying for my school fees. And they will ensure that I adequately compensated them, especially during holidays. And I was happy to help them, because in the process I came to learn much more about what I'm doing today. So there used to be three main people. There used to be an agricultural extension officer, there used to be a health officer, and there used to be a vet officer. And they used to drive and ride across these villages in some white motorcycles and some Suzukis that I have not seen them lately, but those of us who grew in the village may know of these people. And they were actually the first careers that we came into contact with. So as young people, you'll hear people saying, I would want to be an agricultural extension officer, I want to be a veterinary, I want to be a doctor, because they could see these health people going around. And of course, we called anyone in a white coat a doctor, regardless of whether they were community health workers. So that's how we, as young kids, we began looking at them, and they're coming in motorcycles and cars, and we really admired them. But the role these people played was so crucial. Community health workers, there was a time when cholera, there was a time when typhoid, there was a time when malaria and bilharzia were near a national disaster in our country. There was a time when, the open defecation was in itself a menace. And we had chiefs going around villages ensuring that every homestead has a pit latrine. It was a campaign sanctioned from the highest officers in the country, ensuring that every homestead has a pit latrine. And that helped to erase so many of what, there were conversations of flying toilets, even within slums. And just very simple ethical issues of community health workers going around villages, telling every homestead, have a pit latrine. If they find so much long grass near your homestead, you're asked to slash it up so that it doesn't become a breeding ground for mosquitoes. If there was any stagnant water around your homestead, you are advised to drain it. Sometimes for those with pit latrines, they were advised to pour ash in the toilet so as to increase its cleanness levels. So those basic ethical issues within our villages and our communities helped us to eradicate malaria, helped us to eradicate typhoid, helped us to eradicate cholera, and today. Imagine if we never had such people going around villages, how much would it have cost us as a country treating patients of cholera, malaria, typhoid, bilharzia? There was a time when malaria was killing so many people in this country, more than all diseases combined. Today, with cancer killing nearly every homestead, if you walk around, especially in these agrarian communities, and ask them, they'll tell you stories. Nearly everyone is in a WhatsApp group trying to contribute for a certain cancer patient somewhere. And why do we have a proliferation of so many cancers within our communities and our people? It basically boils down again to the food. Are we having food of acceptable quality? Because I'll tell you the truth. Cancer and diseases such as HIV, these are not, I say they're not diseases myself. I always say that these are symptoms of the disease of lifestyle. If you have a certain lifestyle, which is the disease, then it will manifest itself in symptoms that we can see. So when someone has a cancer, don't look at the cancer, look at his lifestyle. It could be emanating from the lifestyle, and especially the food, especially, these are diseases that you acquire. You're not born with, and unless now, like in the case of HIV, where you could be born with HIV, but predominantly, you understand the philosophy about it anyway. I'm not a doctor, so I was just saying in a philosophical point of view. So, and vet officers, of course, as I mentioned, they will go around villages advising farmers, for your animals, if you want to eradicate foot and mouth disease, ensure that their homesteads are clean, ensure that, the basic hygiene issues. So the agricultural extension officers will go down across the villages telling farmers, at a certain plot of your land, please do not farm, build gabions at this area. In the other area, you could do crop rotation, you could have maize here, you could have beans there. And these basic issues really helped our farmers to grow food of acceptable quality. And we do not have these extension officers anymore. Farmers farm in the best way they know, and they are sometimes misled, and so many times by the manufacturers of these agrochemicals. In the morning, you'll hear them advertise in local vernacular stations. They'll say a certain pesticide from Syngenta, from Bayer, from Amiran is in the market. It is very effective. And they'll say these in the local vernacular stations. So a farmer, like where I come from in Meru, Marian, there is a vernacular station that most of my folks like listening to, known as Muga FM. And Muga FM have a program they call Kajoka Muremi, which translates to Voice of the Farmer. So every morning farmers are glued listening, and what does the Voice of the Farmer today say? And they hear of all these advertisements of these pesticides. So the next morning they are the nearest agrovet. They're saying there is a certain pesticide I had in the market. They cannot clearly remember the name, but they may remember the company and what it's used for. And the agrovet will say, oh yeah, it's this and this pesticide, and they'll give them. And I have actually not come across any of these advertisements in local vernacular stations where they will actually tell the farmer on the negative effect and impact of these pesticides. A number of pesticides in our market today, over 77 of them are banned in the areas of manufacture. So we have people manufacturing pesticides that they themselves do not use, and they export for use. And if you use them in your area of export, in the areas where they're exported, if you happen to use them in food meant to export to their country, they will not allow you to sell them any food that you've sprayed with chemicals that they've sold to you. But they have no issue you spraying in your vegetables and tomatoes and using them. Such a double, standards that is baseless anyway. When we look at Article 46, again, I will keep on crediting Kenyans for having voted the best document there is. When you look at Article 46 on consumer protection and advertisement, Clause 2 of Article 46 provides that Parliament shall enact legislation to ensure that all advertisements are fair, honest, and decent. When the Constitution uses ethical words like honest, it ceases from just being a wish. It turns to being an imperative. The Constitution is not asking you to be honest. The Constitution is demanding that you are honest in your advertisement. It is not asking you that please be honest. Sometimes when we use honest, we use please there before using the word honest. Please be honest. The Constitution is not asking us. The Constitution is demanding. And it's not just speaking to us. It's speaking even to these multinational companies operating within Kenya, that you must be honest in your advertisement. So that means if you, as Syngenta, want to sell Glamaxon, which contains paraquat to the Kenyans, kindly let them know that, one, paraquat is a possible carcinogenic classified as class 2 under the WHO calendar, and that it has the potential of bringing Parkinsonism. That is now being honest. That is now being fair. That is now being decent, as envisioned in our Constitution, such that a farmer who's going to buy Glamaxon will be buying knowing that I am under the risk of actually getting Parkinsonism by continued exposure to paraquat. In 1996, the then Attorney General for the state of New York, Letitia James, she was quite forthright when pushing President Donald Trump during the past regime. She entered into a consent of assurance of discontinuance with Bayer and Monsanto. I have had a copy of these consent. As I told you, learned friends, you really have to learn more outside than in. And provisions of this consent are that Bayer acknowledges that its product, Roundup, is not harmless as they put it to be. And that it actually has an effect to human beings as it has to rat, meaning it can cause serious harm both to the environment and the human body, especially the gut. And this consent was arised after a series of scientific reports carried jointly with Bayer, Monsanto, and the state of New York. Well, I really wish that someday PCPB would carry joint scientific, analysis and alongside these manufacturers of these pesticides. But before that day arrives, let us rely on what the Attorney General of New York has found. But when Bayer comes to advertise Roundup, they will never disclose the content of these consent that they duly signed in America that actually, disclosed that their active ingredient glyphosate has an effect to human health and especially exposure. But when they come to Kenya, this is never disclosed. So many Kenyans will buy Roundup and they'll always buy it based on the advertisement of how effective it is, disregarding the various health effects it could have in their own health. So you have farmers here who are exposed unknowingly. And because it's a chain, you have consumers who are now even further exposed because, again, they do not know. The farmer is ignorant. And you as an innocent consumer, you are even more harmed because based on this ignorance of the farmer. So there is need for a holistic conversation. Let us restore back these agricultural extension officers. Some of these things, organic guide, do not even require money. Sometimes when we move to court, the government looks at it and says, now where do we get the money to implement these? Some of these things don't require money. Did we require any money to fight typhoid, cholera, bilharzia? It was just simple policies that let every homestead have a pit latrine. How do we fight these cancers, even amongst our primary users, the farmers? Let every homestead have a store for the safe storage of these pesticides. Let every farmer have protective gear. Let, every region have a well-designated area for the disposal of the empty containers of these pesticides. If today you buy 1 liter of Roundup and you read the instructions are clear that after use, dispose in a well-designated area. So I grew up in Timau. Timau has thousands and thousands of acres of land and agriculture. I've gone to Mwea, where we have our rice. Mwea is over 50,000 acres of land. It's been in existence since 1956. So since 1956, and for over 50,000 acres of land, I found not even a single designated area for the disposal of these containers after use. And it is well foreseeable to the manufacturers of these containers that the farmer is only interested with the content, that after the use of the content, they'll need to dispose of these containers. So you may blame the farmer, but what is the alternative? Where is this well-designated area for the disposal of these containers? So these are the bases with which we moved to court. And some of these issues just require a gazette notice for the Minister of Agriculture to wake up in the morning and say, if you are a farmer, you should have a separate store for the storage of pesticides. You should have proper gear for use while spraying. You should have a near small office where you keep a calendar and a flow chart of how you spray, what you spray with. Once you've finished spraying, dispose these containers at certain designated areas that we have, as the Ministry of Agriculture, outlined the following areas as the designated areas for the disposal of these containers. And then the manufacturers will take those containers and then they can recycle in the best way which they know. And these simple ethical issues would go a long way in protecting not just the farmers, but we as consumers. To put it clearly, as a country, Kenya, we do not have the luxury of a healthcare system that we can rely on curative measures. We can only excel through preventive approach to healthcare. Because if in 2000 we never focused on preventing cholera, malaria, and bilharzia, We would never have afforded to treat all these people who are exposed to malaria and typhoid and cholera and bilharzia. We'll never afford the cost of their healthcare. Even today, sometimes I see the government trying hard, but that's the wrong approach. Even though we build a 20,000 bed capacity for cancer patients, every year we have 40,000 new cancer cases. So how many beds do we need to build? It's not sustainable. We will never build enough. We can never cure enough. Every time we'll come with new health systems, we may brand them and bring new ones. Every time we will enforce and ensure Kenyans are contributing, but we will never contribute enough. Go to the cancer center at KNH. Just do random data of what is the background of most of these patients. You'll find most of them are former farm workers. Most have actively interacted with the use of these pesticides that we are bringing to court. These are the people who are feeding you 5 years ago, and now they're on their deathbed. These are the people who've also been consumers, because, it's a food chain, because this farmer farmed for you, gave you food. This mama mboga has been supplying it at your closest market. And in the process, she's packaging these tomatoes. Sometimes they cut even these vegetables. So she's also exposed. Sometimes I go to the market not just to buy vegetables, but also to educate some of these mama mbogas and to know of their supply chain. I find so many of them in WhatsApp groups contributing for their fellow mama mbogas who've acquired some of these hated health issues, which are relatable to handling of this food, which is laced with this carcinogenic substrate of these pesticides. So many times people ask me, when you fight these companies and when you fight this science, what is the alternative? And to be honest, I do not fight the science. I actually think that the science has so much potential, limitless potential, that it has the ability to provide us with safe alternatives that do not imperil our lives and livelihoods. I do not think that science is just limited to the use of Roundup, whose use is tied up to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I do not think that it is limited to paraquat, whose use is bringing us Parkinsonism. And as I said, we as a people have farmed for thousands of years without glyphosate and paraquat. Generations before us have had sustained agriculture. And I like the name of your podcast, as I pointed out. In an African homestead, just a few years ago, the most protected area was the granary. And the granary was always built at the middle of the village. And if anyone was seen around the granary, and God forbid, people suffer from stomach aches, you will become an outcast. You will not convince the villagers that you did not poison them. Even kids were allowed to play anywhere, but not around the granary. In fact, those who manned the granary were the elderly women. These are the people who are allowed to go to the granary because it was believed with their age and experience they were able to handle food safely for the people. Now today, imagine our grandparents had very safe food that was very well handled and of acceptable quality. Now today, with no granaries, we have to rely on our farmers who will bring us vegetables to Kirigiti, to Sokomjinga. Here now it has a very good name, no longer Sokomjinga, to village market. So these are where our granaries are. How is the food being handled in these granaries? But let me tell you something. If I walked to UK today and walked in Waitrose and bought tomatoes, I have a very high chance of determining with precision where those tomatoes came from. So as a European consumer, I am able to know who my farmer is. And before the food arrives to the European table, the European government have done the work for them. Before you export tomatoes to UK, they will screen them at the airport. If they happen to find any substrate of these pesticides in those tomatoes, they'll charge you what they call a dumping fee. A dumping fee means that you've sold us garbage, and we need to dispose of your garbage, and we have to charge you for the disposal of this garbage. So next time you'll not attempt selling them garbage. And when it arrives again in UK, it is screened again and put against their regulations to ensure that their citizens are accorded food of acceptable quality. So if I go and buy tomatoes in Waitrose, I for sure know that they are not laced with mancolas. I for sure know that they do not have more than acceptable quantities of mancozeb. Now, the same cannot be said of you and I.
Yeah, it just shows the difference between when governments really, put in the work and try to do the work that they're supposed to do to their citizens. And something that jumped out when you were talking about like advertising, I usually see like in the US when they are doing advertising, let's say like they have a drug, literally half of the advert is usually the side effects of the drug, right? So, this drug is going to help you with your headache, but also it has some side effects. It's going to make you dizzy or it's going to make you dehydrated. So it gives all the side effects that drug is going to have in your body.
Correct. We have to ask ourselves whether we really hate ourselves enough that we do not care what just comes into us. The irony of it is, the same farmers farming tomatoes to Waitrose are the same farmers farming tomatoes for Marigiti. But for the tomatoes going to Europe, they are farmed with certain stringent practices. Growing up, there used to be this culture where my mom would have very special and nice-looking utensils for visitors, and then she had a set of plastic cups for us. And when visitors were around, we were now allowed to use these very nice-looking pieces of cutlery and utensils. And for a moment, you may think that, we used to have that 5-star. No sooner. I think this is why I can use no sooner than in a very correct manner. No sooner had the visitors left than they returned back to the cupboard. And we are back to default settings, where we have to go on with our own plastic cutlery. And we've brought the same culture even in our farming, that we have very high standards for the export market to the Western world and Europe, and extremely very low standards for ourselves. So it's a question of really, we Kenyans, do we really hate ourselves that we prefer someone else to have things of high quality and we can do with a very low quality? Yeah. And these things do not require money. They don't require rocket science. They just require gazette notices. They just require goodwill from the Minister of Agriculture, as I said, to just have some policies. And so that you and I, and even him, the sad thing, and I always say this is not just an issue of Kelvin Kubai. The Minister of Agriculture has relatives as children. They have been to schools here in this country. He doesn't know the kind of githeri or rice they eat, where it's coming from. It could be laced with some of these pesticides. The CEO of PCPB, he may so much defend these pesticides, but at the end of the day, he has relatives, he has children, he has a wife. He doesn't know. He has no control of the kind of quality of food that his family is having. His position there does not protect him from adulteration of the quality of food that is presented to his family, and not just to his family, even to himself. He'll walk to a restaurant, he's hungry, he gets in, he doesn't know the tomatoes that prepared is very well kachumbari, where they're coming from. So let us look at it at the perspective of, it's not about them, it is actually about me. And I have told my mom anytime, again, if she ever serves me with different cutlery from... So I have to buy her a new set and tell her that this is also for you. We used to have clothes that you would wear on Sundays. And any other day you have to wear anything else. But when it comes to Sunday, you have very clean set of clothes for you and very nice looking clothes. There was even a Kenyan name for it, Sunday best, So this bad culture of ours has morphed up into very sensitive issues of our food. So farming has been inherent among our people and communities. We did not begin it the other day. And we can actually farm food of acceptable quality for ourselves. We can actually do it. And so many farmers in Nyandarua, I hear nowadays, they have two separate set of farms. They have one farm where they grow their very good potatoes for their own chips, and then they have a separate farm where they grow now chips for us. Now the problem is, they'll have very good beans here and some very good beans here for themselves, and there's cross-pollination, so it doesn't matter. You're still exposed anyway. So you cannot be safe as a farmer, and I would want this message to reach our farmers. You cannot be safe as a farmer alone when everyone else is not safe. Your safety is everyone's safety. So you have to be safe, and you make everyone else's food safe. So you can't just exclude yourself from this conversation. It has to be holistically done. So that is the basis within which we moved to court. As I pointed out, we have very many of these pesticides which are banned in the areas of manufacture, but still used in our countries. When we moved to court, against this agrochemicals company. The first respondent was the Agrochemicals Association of Kenya, which is the umbrella organization that has all these other members under them. And we also sued the PCPB, Pest Control and Licensing Board. And PCPB, they've always blamed our farmers. I've heard them so many times saying, Kenyan farmers are not complying to directives. Now, the irony of it is, when we ask them why they allow these pesticides that are banned, they say that Kenya follows a different philosophy of looking at exposure. They say that a pesticide may be toxic, but, if you follow guidelines, the exposure may not be sufficient to warrant an effect to your health. So on one hand, they agree that our farmers are mostly exposed. On the other hand, they say that we allow them because toxicity does not mean exposure. Such a conflicting approach, especially when we are talking of highly hazardous pesticides, HHPs. And these pesticides do not care of your interpretation. They really don't care. You see, if we were even to go by their definition, if we look at the conditions of the American and European farmers vis-a-vis the conditions of the Kenyan farmer, an American and European farmer have highly mechanized agriculture. Even their level of exposure is minimized. But a Kenyan farmer is in actual contact with these pesticides. They use an knapsack. And one knapsack may have been in use even for more than 10 years. It is not greased, it is leaking. So the levels of exposure to the farmer are nearly 10 times more than it is with the American farmers. So if American agencies, the sister agencies to PCPB, are banning them because of exposure to their farmers, whose exposure is quite or significantly reduced, then why is it that PCPB is not 10 times more banning these pesticides? Because Kenyan farmers are even much more exposed than the American and European farmers. And if PCPB fails to do this, what they do now is this risk is transmitted to the Ministry of Health, because these farmers, 10 years down the line, will start presenting with these health conditions, and they'll be now demanding the rest of us Kenyans to take care of their health. You and I will have to pay for SHA, and pay we shall, because we need to treat our farmers. They are our people, they are our citizens. But in the first place, we would have protected them. You and I would not need to be paying all this money for this healthcare system if we focused on a preventive approach to our healthcare system. I hear there is buses that come from my villages, Zuko in Meru, bringing cancer patients to KNH. It's very sad. I've been to these fields, and sometimes I even wished I was wrong, because I've gone to see farmers who, in the morning, they just took milk to the dairy. Then, with a team of forensic experts and scientists, we test them and subject them to this test. And when we go, we meet very high levels of paraquat within their blood. I've seen farmers with more than 2 units of paraquat in their blood. Essentially, the human body is supposed to have 0 unit of paraquat. So you have a farmer here with 2 or more units of paraquat. What that means is, in the next 5 years, this farmer will have hated Parkinsonism. And even 0.1 unit of paraquat in your blood is way too much, because the human body breaks down paraquat to monoquat, and in the process, so that it can get rid of it, and in the process it creates a lot of oxidative stress. And so when these cells suffer from oxidative stress, it makes the human body vulnerable to other secondary infections. So they cannot be able to, their bodies, in other words, lose immunity. It's just like what HIV does to the human body. Because now, if a body here, which is supposed to be defending you against infections, but it is actively breaking down paraquat to monoquat. So if any other secondary infections get you, just brings you down. This is the sad state of our nation. And I really wished that I was even wrong when I was doing this test. Because when I'm meeting these patients, hearing their stories, I really wished I was wrong, that if I subject him to test, I really hope that I do not even find some of these active ingredients within their blood system. But shock on me. And so that is primarily one of the reasons why I'm in court, because we have to ask the court, but by failure of these manufacturers to abide by the provisions of our Constitution on Articles 43, Article 46, as I've been reading them, then these people have suffered. Were it not for their product, then these people would not be having paraquat within their blood. And had these companies carried out extended producer responsibility. What extended producer responsibility is, in a nutshell, I would say this: you cannot say that you sold marijuana to a group of school kids, but you explained to them that marijuana could be harmful to them. So now you sold to them, but I warned them that the use of marijuana could have harm to them. Because that is what these agrochemicals companies do. You're selling highly hazardous pesticides to a group of semi-illiterate or near-illiterate farmers, but with the argument that we told them that they have to use protective gear. So it's not just enough. Have these manufacturers held, extended producer responsibility? Have they built well-designated areas? For some of these farmers, some of them did not even go and buy paraquat. This is just their neighbor who bought paraquat and sprayed it upstream. And when the rains came and washed down, the farmer downstream fed this water to his kettle or, fetched this water for their own domestic use. In this country, there is no illegality known in law that create any offense for anyone living downstream. But the problem is people living downstream have been nearly condemned to death. Their only mistake is that they are living downstream because they have, no control of what the people upstream are doing. For instance, some of these highly hazardous pesticides, like glyphosate, Roundup, like this paraquat, you should not use them in gently sloping locations adjacent to riparian lands. You cannot be spraying Roundup 5 meters from a river. But then how many farmers will know this? This is not common knowledge to every farmer. They do not know. You do not spray Roundup without a buffer zone. A buffer zone will mean that you are spraying on this field, but to protect your neighbor, you've planted napier grass, rows and rows of napier grass, such that even though there were weeds and substrate of this glyphosate was blown by the weeds, it does not reach your neighbor's vegetables. But how many farmers know this? And how many neighbors will tell you that if you're using Roundup next to my plot of land, then you should have a buffer zone? Even farmers themselves don't know, so they have no control of what their neighbor is using. And if they knew, then they would actually be able to enforce it and tell their neighbors that if you have to spray certain and certain pesticides, then you have to consult us, and we have to come and inspect that your farm is compliant for you to use Roundup on certain fields. Because personally, in my very small plot of land in Nyahururu, I will not allow my neighbor to use certain pesticides if they do not meet these standards of ensuring that these substrates do not flow within my farm. And if they did so, I would sue them on occupier's liability. And there is a case law to that effect. In law, if your neighbor keeps a snake and this snake harms you, or if your neighbor is keeping a snake and this snake in some way scares a cat or anything, and in the process it injures you, you could sue your neighbor because of that snake in his farm. Because if you keep something dangerous within your premises, you have an extended right to ensure that what you keep does not harm your neighbor. So it's the same concept. If you're spraying an highly hazardous pesticides within your farm, you have a responsibility to ensure me as your immediate neighbor, I am not harmed. So you have to, protect your neighbor in extension. And this now neighbor principle should extend to these manufacturers of these pesticides, that if you're selling highly hazardous pesticides to a class of farmers who are nearly illiterate or semi-illiterate, then you have a responsibility to go and let them know and teach them on safe practices of use of this pesticide. It's not just enough to manufacture and then distribute to an agrovet, and so the farmer is accessing your product through the agrovet. And at the agrovet, you try one day and go buying like Roundup in an agrovet. I see that some agrovet in Nairobi, although my villagers always say Nairobi ni shamba la mawe, but there are still some agrovet here. They sell Roundup especially for use even in these golf courses. They'll not give you any instructions even on that use. They'll not even tell you of any side effect. The only discussion will be on price, that we are selling it at 1,200. If you bargain the Kenyan way, they could sell it to you at 1,100. So the conversation is all about price. But what they're selling here is not bread, is not bananas. This is an highly hazardous pesticide whose discussion should not just be the normal discussion of buyer-seller bargaining here. It should go to an extended producer responsibility of breaking down to this user of the effect, even going further to ask him, why are you spraying this Roundup? To the extent that you do not sell this Roundup to a farmer who is not compliant. That's what happens in the US. You cannot just go and buy Roundup in the US or glyphosate. You have to show a license that you are a farmer and that you are actually a farmer who's compliant. Your farm is compliant, But now here, anyone can buy these pesticides. They are just like bread in the market. So we need to have a holistic conversation as far as our agricultural system is concerned. And this way, we'll have safe food of acceptable quality. We have advanced technology. If we really wield it, we would know who our farmer is. It's just a matter of technology, and we have so many Gen Zs here. We would be able to track down with precision the tomatoes I buy at village markets today. I will be able to tell who was my farmer, where they came from. And I can tell for certainty who my farmer was, and further, what he used in spraying them, such that I have the option of choosing whether I want organically farmed tomatoes or these other tomatoes that have been sprayed on. I am able to choose, so that we as consumers now can dictate. And if consumers preferred more organic, then the farmers will be forced, because of the market demand and sale and market forces. They will be also forced to know that, organic fetch higher prices in the market, and many of our consumers prefer organic. Then they themselves will, in a small way, the butterfly effect, be able to, in their own way, also now start instilling better farming practices, including these organic farming.
It's very, very important background for listeners to have an idea of what holistic sort of solutions look like for such a problem. And I think you've laid out very important points, like who the respondents are and what it takes to take this petition into court. So, is it possible if you, let's say, XYZ respondent, so let's say in this case Bayer or Monsanto, they are part of the respondent, can they say no, that they don't want to be part of this petition?
When you are sued, you can only respond. you can only respond. I took nearly 2 years to draft this petition. And at the time, I was in my third year in university. And I read widely from precedents in America. I took time to understand, because they were quite scientific. Anyway, it's a very scientific petition. So I took time to understand. And based on my growing up, I could relate. And I could now start to get a nexus of the hated health issues I would see in my community and the extensive use of these ideas as pesticides. So I took time to understand it, and every day I will do a paragraph. I will meet some of my professors and ask them to expound more on it, and I will go and see cross-cutting professionals. So we stood a number of these respondents, because each and every respondent there is not there by mistake. If you file a petition and you are not very keen on particularity means that if I have a respondent, let's say first respondent, I must show with precision. I must tie why that respondent is in that petition. So I must say that this respondent produces this and this, and manufactures this, and sells and distributes it, and this and this has been found to have this and this effect. And so these effects have been seen in these and these petitioners, and because of this, these petitioners are in court against that respondent based on that. So if you have 14 respondents, it means that you have to narrow down to each and every reason why that respondent is appearing there. It's not just a matter of listing names and leaving it at there, because now you give them a very good defense. They'll always say that this petition is frivolous, it shall be stricken down, it's not particularized, and there's a very well-known precedence that says if a petition is not particulate enough, then it should be stricken down. So you have to be very particular, note why you listed that person in that petition. And they have hired nearly the best law firms in this country to defend this petition. And I like the fact that they've done this, because we needed a holistic conversation as to how agriculture is. And you've seen how agriculture is devolved. So you have also now county government are supposed to be spearheading agriculture. But what do our county government do? Do these county government have county agricultural extension officers? Do we have county officers going around villages educating farmers on some of these ways we're speaking about? When we say that we need extension officers, who's supposed to pay for them? It should be the county government. You see, now the Ministry of Agriculture will say that, you see, now agriculture is no longer devolved. We cannot dictate what Kericho County does with tea farmers. We cannot dictate what Meru County does with Miraa farmers. We cannot dictate what Embu County does with rice farmers and Mogoka farmers. We cannot dictate what Machakos County does with manpeas. So I sued all the county government, their respondent, because I wanted them to come to the table and explain what protection they are giving to their respective farmers within their counties. So, and this is one of the things I hoped that devolved unit would really foster. Especially now in my village where I come from in Meru. You'll find people will spray Mira tonight. In the next morning, they're selling it to the market. And that translates to very high cases of even esophagus cancer, especially within Meru. It's very relatable, directly pointable to the use of these highly hazardous pesticides. But what does the county government do? Does it educate our Mira farmers about even, like Mira, there is not any one pesticide that is manufactured for use in Mira. It's just that now that they have to say, no, well, this one is used in Sukuma Wiki. Well, we can extend it to Mira, And sometimes farmers make their own concoctions. They will combine more than 10 pesticides together. So if you were to subject that concoction to a lab test, it will beat logic. Even the manufacturers themselves would be shocked at this new element that they cannot even tell, And some of these pesticides should not even be mixed together. So these pesticides are manufactured with scientists, near genius, and chemists. But you're giving them for use to a semi-literate farmer somewhere in the hills of Nyambene or in the valleys of Kedong to just mix them up and use. And you don't tell them that certain compounds here, you cannot mix them up. And so they end up mixing them up and spraying their very good tomatoes farmed just here at Kindaruma and Masinga Dam. And the very next moment, they are within our reach in our everyday shelves here in Nairobi. So we needed a holistic conversation. So we brought in all these stakeholders and all these respondents, and they filed responses, sometimes over 1,000 pages of responses. And I really love Lady Justice Kemei, who was handling the petition, because she has taken time to read through all these materials. And when we had our preliminary ruling, which we won on the grounds that we asked the court that there are so many Kenyans out there affected by the use of these pesticides. And these Kenyans also deserve a chance to take part in this petition. So we asked her to allow us to advertise this petition. Even what I'm doing here is also I'm advertising. I'm asking people who've been affected to also come forward. They can reach out to me. And we have a team of scientists and forensic experts, because we have a three-pronged approach to this case, where we have the science, the law, and advocacy. So the science takes precedence, and the science means that if you came, for instance, Organic Guy, and told me, by the way, I also used Glamaxon when I was growing up, and Dudutrin, and I think it might be manifesting in some of the health conditions I see, then it will not be enough for us to believe you. We would have to subject you now to lab tests and have our doctors do comprehensive medical legal report to ascertain with precision whether this could be true, because we don't want to bring fixatious and cooked up claims. So our doctors will look at your medical history, whether you've been treated before, what conditions have you been diagnosed with. They'll look at your occupational history, how have you interacted with these pesticides, and based on your occupation and medical history, they'll now subject you to further lab tests, and then they'll develop a medical legal report based on your occupation history, your medical history, and lab tests, such that we have comprehensive data. So once now the doctors have done that and they tell us that this potential case, we think that it could be related to this petition, then we, the lawyers, now come in and sign you up as our client if you are willing, and we are able to take up your case. And lastly now is also advocacy, as I am doing now, sensitizing our people out there that safety begins with you, and also trying to bring our government to just put gazette notices, tell these farmers to have safe stores for storing these pesticides, designate designated areas for disposal of these empty containers, teach farmers upstream that some of these pesticides you cannot use them if your land is adjacent to a riparian land. Such simple practices that could go a long way in protecting every Kenya. And these are not wishes. We are asking them to abide by our constitution. Article 42, as I said, says every Kenya has a right to a clean and healthy environment. And so if someone is using Roundup somewhere upstream and it's flowing in your river, what they're doing is they are denying you your constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. and those mandated to ensure you have a clean and healthy environment are these respondents whom we've sold here.
Yeah, I think that one makes sense. So I'm just wondering, in terms of evidence, I'm assuming you have a very high bar for you to prove that if you get a client who says, hey, I used this pesticides years ago and I have this. So the bar is very high in terms of gathering evidence. So I'm just thinking that also means you have to spend a lot of money in doing so. So how are you able to fund the whole process?
Honestly, it's quite an expensive exercise. To do comprehensive tests for just one patient comes to around 40,000. We're now doing nearly 200 patients. So you can see where the figures come to be, and of course also our legal fees. So it's an expensive exercise. So sometimes we have proposals to NGOs, some that fund the case, are willing to help and fund the case. And this is the most unfortunate thing, and this makes it gets me bad. Because these companies are harming people who have no ability to fight back. Because for a farmer in Kirigiti, what concerns them is their kids going to school, so they are farming for their basic needs. So they will never sue Bayer on their own. You'll never see our rice farmers in Moya suing Syngenta. Why are they not suing Syngenta? One, they do not have that capacity to go and sue Syngenta. They look at the legal fees, they look at the medical fees required even to have all these lab tests, and they'll give up. They do want to sue, but they have no ability to sue. By lacking capacity to sue, these companies continue having their way in taking advantage of vulnerable people who are not able to fight back. If Syngenta, if Bayer were continuing their operations in America as they are in Kenya, they would have closed down a long time ago. If the Agrochemical Association of Kenya was continuing operations in Europe, or even PCPB itself, if PCPB itself was working as it is in Kenya, if it used the same philosophy and approach and methodology in US, some of those people working in PCPB will be in jail for not doing their mandate as per the Constitution in protecting the Kenyan people. It's the first petition of its kind, so we really intended to do it properly, do it well, and set good precedents. Our friends in Uganda and Tanzania who are now coming to borrow a leaf on what to do, they also want to, and sometimes when things begin in Kenya, they flow to our neighbors, and I'm happy because as a continent, we can be able now to protect our people. East Africa has nearly 500 million people. And these 500 million people offer a very big market. See, Tanzania is nearly all arable land. Uganda is nearly all arable land. Kenya has extensive agriculture going on. We have over 500 million people who have to feed. So if we have to sustain our populations without subjecting our healthcare systems to all this pressure, we have to go preventive care approach. And that means erasing from our market these highly hazardous pesticides that are bringing so much health effect to our people.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because you mentioned a little bit on the areas that you've gone to. You mentioned Timau, where people are growing potatoes. So far, since you meant the advertisement to people, what areas are you seeing more people coming from?
We have more people coming from these areas of high horticulture zones, especially in Timau, in Naivasha. And there's a great correlation, by the way, in the findings we are having in Timau and Naivasha. And this exercise has also been a learning experience for me. And I can see, I can actually now see everything condensing around this petition. Because when we filed it, it was very scientific. But now, based on what I can actually see from this patient and my client, I can now start to see everything condensing. And I could see people in Timau and people in Naivasha have used actually the same pesticides, and they've developed the same health conditions. So regardless of their geography, the effect has been similar. And it's now point out to these residues within their bodies being a causative agent to these healthy effects that they are having, especially farm workers who've been working in these agricultural farms, in flower farms. We've also found them to be quite exposed. and most of them also seem to be most affected, alongside even small-scale farmers. So I can now see the actual effect manifesting in the patient and the claimant.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. Do you have are you in control of the timeline of how long the case will take? So you started this in last year. So do you have a timeline of how long this case will take?
Actually, we started in 2022. And before 2022, I've been drafting it since 2021 when I was in law school. One of the things we'll urge the Lady Justice, the good judges, based on the health effect we see among these patients. Some of them do not have the luxury of time. So we would want this matter to be heard on priority basis. If we have presidential election petitions heard within 2 weeks, then it's possible also based on the urgency that this case brings, we can urge the good judge that it is heard and determined within the next 6 months. And it's possible to have even a 1 week of hearing this matter. Such that we have hearing, we have a calendar set out for the hearing of the matter even for over a week. And there are so many councils also, so we'll sway them to agree based on the urgency of the petition. Sometimes fair justice will mean that it also comes in a timely manner. So I have patients who are at KNH, continuing their treatment. I would want them to at least see the outcome of this petition. I think the judge can agree with us on us based on these unique circumstances of the case.
You yourself and the judge can sort of find a way to get a good timeline for the case.
Yes, all the councils and the court can agree on the timelines, and this matter was certified urgent at the time of filing, so it's just a matter of asking the court to hear it on priority basis.
So I'm thinking, because we have seen similar cases happen in let's say in the US, where they got, I think, millions of dollars as compensation for some of the victims who were used on that case. So does it have any effect in terms of for your case? Can you use that kind of evidence that was presented in those court cases to be presented similarly in this case?
Absolutely, yes, because sometimes it's a bit logic that you are paying white people there in America and Europe, you're not paying black people here. The same effect these pesticides have to the white people is the same effect they have to the black people. In any case, Kenyans have even been much more exposed to levels even more high than even what we see in UK and Europe. So these manufacturers will have to explain to us what rationale or what is the basis that they are compensating people in America and Europe by leaving out their consumers here in Kenya who are equally affected by the use of these pesticides. Because science knows no boundaries. So if glyphosate has one effect to you in America, it has the same equal effect to me here in Kenya. It's not that we Kenyans are made of iron and Americans are made of human flesh. We all have blood in our veins and we all have cells that suffer the same effect. So they would have to bring their own scientists to explain to the court that they affect Americans differently than they affect Kenyans. and sometimes we also look at it. If you look at it, you'll also see a ratio issue here, because they have known for a long time that these pesticides have an effect even to their consumers in America, who, by the way, are not as much exposed as Kenyans. But you do not have the same, provisions for the Kenyan consumers.
Yeah, makes sense. And it's quite interesting. During the cases, I saw actually that these companies fabricated science that they were giving into the court. So it makes you wonder, at what length are you able to certify this is actually a scientific sort of finding they have in court for themselves?
Correct, and that's why we inserted a 3-pronged approach. In Kenya here we have also capacity. I think one thing I like about Kenyans is they are intelligent, and we have industrious and hardworking Kenyans across all fields. So we have experts, especially in forensics, who are able to do those de novo tests and come up with a credible result and evidence. And we are happy if these companies want us to again do these tests jointly with them. We are happy to do so. And with other components of environment that are silent, yes, most affected, like bees, especially imidacloprids, like malathion, chloropiferos, they have a high effect on the bees. yeah, even the bees have a voice in this petition. They also need to be heard and protected as well, because there is a 80% chance that the beans you eat are pollinated by bees. So if someone kills all these bees, or they're affected by these pesticides, it means then you're not able to have your normal plate of beans. So it's a scientific case. That's why we have science leading and the law following, and we take guidance from our medical teams and our forensic teams. And we wanted to do this. It's the only patriotic duty I will do for our country. I was happy to have created precedents. When I sued the British Army, they came to court and said they were immune. And they say they have sovereign immunity and they cannot be sued. And I beat them up. And the court say that they do not have sovereign immunity. Looking back, any other Kenyan whose rights have been violated by the British Army can actually go to court based on these precedents and say that your actions have violated my right. And they would have a channel. But before that, so many people, so many communities who've lived with British Army have suffered myriads of injustices without any reproof. But now there is a precedent that you actually do not enjoy sovereign immunity as you made everyone believe. So the patriotic thing I can do for my country is that even when I'm no longer here, there is precedence that Kenyans are food of acceptable quality. And this may begin slowly, but I know that it will gain root. And if our court actually agrees with us and interprets those provisions of the Constitution and says they are justiciable, they're not just mere wishes, and they're imperatives that our government and these manufacturers must abide with, then future generations of Kenyans will not be suffering from Parkinsonism. If we eradicated cholera, typhoid, bilharzia by just simple practices of cleanliness, then we can deal with Parkinsonism by ensuring the safety of our farmers is at the forefront of our agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for leading the charge on that. So I'm thinking in terms of what you want the court to compel the guys to do.
So we have more than 14 respondents, and we wanted a holistic conversation on our agriculture, and there are specific orders sought against each of the respondents. For the manufacturers, we would want them to do extended consumer responsibility. They're able to train farmers on the safe use of these pesticides. We also wanted them to sensitize the farmers, and in the advertisement, we ordered them to be more honest, decent, and fair. They're able to tell the farmers on the health effect of these pesticides, and also to compensate these patients who've been affected by the use of these pesticides. For our county government, we wanted them to introduce these extension officers to guide our farmers. For PCPB, we wanted it to ban and withdraw these highly hazardous pesticides from the market. For the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Agriculture, we wanted them to focus on preventive healthcare approach as far as consumer right and environment right are concerned. For the Ministry of Agriculture, again, we wanted it to spearhead the process of, alongside county government, of educating farmers. So we had specific orders sought against each of the respondents, but in a holistic manner to ensure that at the end of the day, all these stakeholders within the agricultural sector render their constitutional responsibilities to ensuring Kenyans have food of acceptable quality.
Do you have a specific figure you want the pesticide manufacturers to?
We are able to determine this based on the medical legal report. So I failed to mention this, but once doctors have a look at you, they're able to do what we call a care plan. A care plan would mean that they're able to say that a certain patient needs this kind of money for his continued health care, for even the quality of his life that has been affected. If someone has lymphoma cancer, they're able to break down and say the treatment of lymphoma in Kenya would require this. They require transport facilities to chemos available. They would need these and these living conditions, their food. They need special diet, and this is the diet, and this is what comes to. So they do a very good care plan, but based on the manifestations of the health effect. And this on a case-by-case analysis, because patients are manifesting with different conditions. So we are not saying that we are demanding 10 billion for each and every patient. No, it depends with the specific, on a case-by-case analysis based on their medical legal report and based on their care plans that are developed thereafter.
And this is only for the people involved within the case. So someone who is outside the case cannot come later on and join the case.
So there's a window that was given. We did our advertisement on 30th November. So the days end 30th December because we had a 30-day window period. So even now, someone can still come as there is still time to be joined in the case. But we also asked for other orders that will go in a long way, because our doctors and experts are able to do something they call a DALI. And a DALI would mean that we went in Naivasha and examined 100 people. Out of these 100, we found 60 of them have presented with these conditions. So Naivasha has a population of, let's say, 50,000 people. So it shows that there are other people in Naivasha whom we've not reached out, but have the same effect based on this sample size to have this similar effect. So we call on new manufacturers to have maybe increase the capacity of level 4 in Naivasha to a level 5 to be able to handle some of these cases and prescriptions.
You mentioned earlier that you're going against, your former professors, and you are going against giants, like really, big companies within the pesticide manufacturing space. So I'm wondering, do you ever receive like any pressure, yes, or have you received any like negative press, or we haven't gotten to that stage, or do you expect such a treatment?
To be honest, this journey is not simple. As I said so many times, people will brand you and say this is just an activist fighting the science. I've told them severally, what I'm fighting is your grip of the market, is your product, and they don't own the science actually. So we are fighting your product, which has very limited science, and we believe there are better products with science that put the health of the users at the center. And there is always the fear, the threat, but something has to be done. My grandfather was a field marshal in the Mau Mau War. It will be very unjust for me to be frightened and not fight for a just cause. So I think this is worth fighting for. Even my kids will look back and say, based on what Dad did, at least we can know who our farmer is.
It's a very worth course, and thank you very much for taking up the course. I mean, as you said, it requires a lot of research, a lot of mental fortitude, a lot of your time to get it done. So very much looking forward to it, and I'll be following it closely to see how it goes. This is part of the podcast. I have a segment I call Rapid Fire Questions. So what I've done, I've prepared 10 questions for you. And the goal is just to get to know you a little bit more, just in case it didn't happen through the podcast. Are you ready for the questions?
Yeah.
So the first question is, if you weren't a lawyer, what career would you be doing right now?
Well, I said I wanted to be a dentist. Well, I think I'll be dealing with teeth.
Second question, what is the most underrated article in the Constitution?
It's Article 46. And Article 46 is on consumers, but it appears between provisions of the Constitution that don't deal with consumers. So sometimes it's rarely missed. And I have another special one in Article 73. Article 73 says in cases brought on environmental pollution, a claimant does not necessarily need to prove harm. So that was one of the provisions I used to beat the British Army, because they were saying, we caused a fire here, and that fire, how do you tell? These people used firewood to cook, and yet you're claiming that smoke has affected them. So you argue that the Constitution does not even require me to prove that it was your fire, not my fire, that affected me. So, but I would go with 46 as far as this case is concerned.
Third question, who inspires you most in the legal world?
Senior Counsel Paul Muite. I like his approach and his fighting spirit, so he's an inspiration.
Fourth question, what is one myth about lawyers you wish Kenyans will stop believing?
One myth about lawyers is we actually do not have the monopoly of knowledge. Sometimes a client will get you on any one issue and they expect an outright answer. So we do not have the monopoly of knowledge. Okay,
the fifth question, if you could cross-examine anyone in the world, who would it be?
One, that would be Barack Obama. I would really want to know what was behind some of the policies he incepted while he was president.
Sixth question, what is your all-time favorite book?
Well, I think here you may give me 5 minutes, because my all-favorite book is the archives, the Kenyan archives. And it has a collection of so much document that I think we as a country, so many times you go to the archives to look for directions. If you are lost in Nairobi, you go to archives and you get direction. But I think archives has the actual direction for our country, where we went wrong. But it's not outside the archives, it's inside the archives. So if you get to the inside the archives, you have to pour through all the documents in the archives, and as a country, we'll know where we got wrong. Much of what I say here, I've actually learned it at the archives. I found so many documents in the archives, even on those agricultural extension officers, health workers, and how the colonial government did it, because that was actually a creature of the colonial government. And the document there, the kind of knowledge I found there is mind-blowing. And much of my off time now, and instead of going to the gym to exercise my muscles, I go to the archives to exercise my brain muscles and learn more. And it's really one of the places. Sometimes I go there and I'm shocked. I find 4 Kenyans inside and 100 outside. So if you're waiting for your boyfriend and girlfriend and he's failed for the date, kindly use that time to get inside the archives and go to the research section. You'll learn 1 or 2 things as you wait for your very late boyfriend or girlfriend.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never gotten inside the archives as well. So that should be a to-do list. 7th question, what is your legal principle you wish every Kenyan understood?
1, I'm always for the small guys against the big guy. Rarely will you find me defending a respondent. I'm always for the petitioner. Yeah, there's more money for the respondent, but I want to work for the small guy.
All right. 8th question, what is one quote you live by?
One quote I live by, it has to be a Bible verse. I'm also a very practicing Christian. It is in the book of Songs of Solomon, astonishingly. On chapter 1, actually, verse 5 and 6. It says, I am black but comely, O you daughters of Jerusalem, as the tent of Kedar. Look not upon me, because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were hungry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. And sometimes it helps me draw inspiration for we African people. She says, my mother's sons were angry with me. They made me a keeper of the year vineyards, but mine own vineyard I have not kept. And that has been the business of African people. We are always keeping the vineyards of our Asian and Western and European brothers, leaving our own vineyards. So we are always happy to produce food of very high quality for our brothers, but we keep not our own vineyard.
Okay, the last one, if you could give advice to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
I'll tell him to be patient and persistent. Sometimes we confuse patience with indolence. Patience should not keep you at the comfort zone. So while patient, be persistent as you've been, and keep on learning, keep on reading.
It's a good one. Always have that mindset of keep learning. I guess you can never go wrong. All right. Thank you very much for making time for the podcast. Really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing all the wisdom and the knowledge that you've done. So if someone wants to get in touch or wants to follow some of your work, how can they do that?
I am very active on Next. I tweet often some of my thoughts randomly. So my handle is Kelvin Kubai. You'll know me when you find some of my tweets there. Yeah, you'll find me.
Okay. So thank you very much again for joining the podcast. I'm sure a lot of guys who listen to this podcast will appreciate the amazing work you are doing, and we're looking forward to see how the litigation goes and be following it very keenly, especially me, who is involved in that space. So I'm sure a lot more people will appreciate the work you're doing as time goes. So till the next podcast, remember to be organic.